contradiction and its perverse pleasures, which is sadly typical of fascism, could be said to be Trump's secret. So the strongman, the classic fascist leader, stirs up the annihilation fears of dropping to the bottom, appeals to the sense of victimhood and the fear that one's own suffering will be denied, while promising an idealized power that can protect. By promising to extirpate the dangerous other, the fascist leader simultaneously appeals to the followers' sense of victimization, while offering them an imaginary strength that will conquer and vanquish the weak liberals who believe that all lives matter, that everyone can live. Those weak liberals who cannot pull the trigger, and in any case, are seeking a pretext for robbing the white man of his power. Because in fact, let's remember, harming is always going to happen to someone. Real men repel this harm, protect white purity, subjugate the threatening but also degraded other, if not actually demand overt, humiliating displays of submission as in the South past. To sum up, Trump's appeal is based on his own identification with a paternal figure who shames and repels all vulnerability, while at the same time displaying with impunity, Trump displays with impunity, the defiance of moral norms and of good behavior that resentful, rebellious boys long to express. In his patriarchal worldview, society cannot be grasped as a complex organism with many different parts, as Lakoff said, but is rather controlled by powerful deal makers and deciders. Authoritarian and democratic ideologies and psychologies cannot meet. And the safety of living in a society of solidarity where all children, even the weak and vulnerable, could be loved and embraced is unimaginable to someone like Trump. The outcome of his contradictory offer to his base is to be the underdog identifying with the top dog, thus reinforcing the fantasy that only one can live and the fears that are attendant on it, while pretending to assuage those fears. In this way, there is created the role of deserving righteous victims. The problem for us is that this construct parodies and plays on the movements by those who have been victimized and oppressed to try to regain or to gain their rights, while claiming that it is the liberal elite who have shamed and betrayed these victims by defending minorities, and it is they who sow gender and sexual confusion. The appeal of what I'm calling this parodic move, it's kind of like a form of masculinity as masquerade. But in this case, it's a kind of victimhood as masquerade. The appeal of this parodic move is thus greater for men who must use Make America Great Again whiteness to buttress manhood, to restore dignity, to claim deservingness, while the other will, in psychological terms, absorb the humiliation and the projected punishment that inevitably must be doled out. Punishment that was already dealt Native people, slaves, and all others who were discarded. And in this way, those others perish in our stead, or so think these men. Because, and every fascist leader, every conservative capitalist has his own version of this belief, only some can live and others must perish. So someone must absorb the role of perishing. In the world of doer and done to, without making some into victims, one cannot escape being done to oneself. You really just have to take a cursory look at National Socialism to see how this worked. Now, as I said, I think that this belief operates primarily through the struggle for social recognition in political life, not primarily through killing, although the murder of black men and boys certainly has not ceased. The elite's inability to grasp how, with the economic crisis and escalation of inequality, appeals to identity would evoke the fear that in the struggle for scarce resources, recognition of the other would win out seems woefully naive. That is, their inability to grasp this seems naive. But also, almost a willful refusal to acknowledge that there are real consequences to the question of whose life matters. In the election, and really for decades, this struggle for recognition got played out in the fight over who would occupy the position of victimhood. And that position had to be there. The suffering that justifies erasing the other because oneself will otherwise be erased. The more powerfully driven people are by this core fantasy that only some can live, the more the dignity and right to exist of the other is going to threaten the self. Respecting the other's suffering, asking people to respect the other's suffering, will then seem to be a denial of their suffering. And what I'm saying is that liberals couldn't recognize that this was a real problem that they had to deal with. They were asking, in effect, everyone to be nice, to be good, to play nice. Now, as I said, it is often, in many people, only one position, one self-state. This very powerful psychological structure of only one can live. And its alternative can be strengthened by offering alternative actions that repair the sense of helplessness and offer hope. But how do we do that? How do we counter the fear that only those who win the victim sweepstakes are saved? We might also consider here that claiming victimhood is a move to avoid blame for harming, because if you have harmed, then you do deserve to be injured and to have that taken away from you, which you want to take away from other people. So being blamed is really tantamount to saying that you deserve to have done to you what you would do to them. It's impossible and dangerous for many people, especially in the South, to admit to themselves or recognize that others have been victimized through the actions of my people with whom they identify, to take responsibility for harming, because it seems to them that then logically they're going to be victimized again. Repair, therefore, seems impossible. The dilemma for those who have chosen to identify upward with the powerful to avoid shame is a way of getting out of absorbing the guilt for harming, but it puts you right back into the position of guilt for harming. You see, so you're really caught a kind of Chinese finger trap, because on the one side you want to identify with the powerful so you'll be saved, but on the other hand you really can't be a harmer, because if you are, you deserve to actually have that done to you, which and so forth. But worse still, unlike the powerful idealized people, for me, there's a chance that my real vulnerability could be exposed and I could fall to the bottom. So I need someone to simultaneously tell me that I am good, blameless, and deserving, to confirm that the system is rigged against me and is favoring those victims who are cutting in line like immigrants, and at the same time to make sure that no one blames me in a way that gets me in trouble. So I'm going to try to curtail the end of this. Stepping out of that kind of do or done to complementarity when we're trying to, shall we say, organize a country to restore democracy, requires us to go beyond political correctness, which denies the fear of retaliation and the fear of further punishment for having harmed. That is, in defending victims' claims, we cannot simply assign all rightness and goodness to ourselves. There must be some way to hold a position that realizes that one group feels the legitimacy of its identity to be endangered by the other's protest. How will that occur? Certainly it won't occur if, in order to purify ourselves and avoid the projection no, I'm sorry. Certainly that won't occur if, in order to purify ourselves, we